it's come time to haul some of this stuff out of here. I'm tired of looking at it, and I'm tired of fretting about it. I think all that stuff, I don't know if I'm energetic enough to take care of that back in there. That can stay there if it has to, at least for a while. But I sure as heck want to get this whole mess out of here. And then start in on taking some of this out. You're coming along for the ride. Isn't that weird? It looks like a maple leaf, but it's not. It's a red oak leaf. Well, that didn't take nearly as long as I expected it to. Now, if I could somehow harness Suki to each pile and have her drag it over to the burn pile for me. That's not going to happen. I don't have a harness. This is just to get an idea of where I am before I start work today. I think this is astonishing. When I first began coming out here on the ATV trail in late April, this was just a stump, oak stump cut at ground level. And over the coming weeks, it began to sprout tiny little hair-like fibers out of the circumference. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, but over the weeks of summer, June, July, August, this has become 6 or 8 new oak trees. Bur oak, you can tell by the rounded tips of the leaves. I'll show you a red oak for comparison when I find one. The leaves are very distinct. I guess I've already talked about this at times during the summer. Well, I've been working on editing video as I do in the mornings. It's about 11:30 right now. Finally, okay, I gotta get away from here. I was getting muddled and not very efficient. And for Suki's sake, who just lays around and lays around, nothing to do, boring. I'm really tuned into her. She woke me up in the night with a loud, forceful cough. Well, that was something a little different. I mean, she usually sort of hacks like she's got an obstruction down her throat. And I've been concerned about that for the last year or two. All right, there's red oak. See how the leaves are much more pointed at the ends. And there's a bur oak. So red oak, bur oak. Once you know the difference, it's fairly obvious. So she did that cough, a couple of them, and they really startled me. And I laid there for, I don't know, it felt like an hour. She didn't do it anymore. I could hear her breathing normally as she fell back to sleep. Boy, there's a lot of debris out here from the really high winds we had. Epic. 3 days ago. As a cold front moved in from Canada and moved us, I'm thinking about a week ago, I was sweating profusely every day. Being outside was just a bummer. And all of a sudden we're down. It's 54 right now. We hit 31 overnight. A hefty freeze. That's Minnesota. I've been looking at that aerial shot of the prow, and there's a line of popples, and I think that's them. Yeah. Let's get closer. Yeah. And they've got this openness in front of them between me and the popples. And it's very noticeable from the aerial view. Yeah, so now I know where they are. Very obvious. My concern with Suki is I have mentioned this to the vets a couple of times previously. Well, I know as well as they do that you can't just put Suki up on the table and open her mouth and look in there. She wouldn't stand for that at all. No dog would. So the only way to really examine her throat, is to sedate her and then do an evaluation. Maybe x-rays, I don't know. That's an expense I would rather avoid. So I don't know what's coming with her. I think almost every day about the inevitability of her having to leave us in this world. And what a shitty event that's going to be. I've decided I don't really have anything more to look at out here. It all looks the same as it did a few days ago when I did this. As promised, I'm going to tell you about the early days of the woods, which I began a week or so ago, maybe a couple weeks now. The woods was 112 miles north of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We lived on the very north side of Minneapolis, actually just a block away from Robbinsdale, which is out there in the northwestern part of Minneapolis. Dad bought the property very end of 1959, I believe. Yeah. And we began going up as a family. It was just empty land. I love that. So in the first year or two, when we'd go up to the woods, it was to clear a clearing, make a fire pit. And in the fall of 1959 or 60, we would go up in the cold fall. And we had family friends who began coming up with us. 4 of them. They had a travel trailer, just a little, and Dad bought a whole load of salvaged storm windows and brought them up to the woods, intending to use them for the cabin walls when he was able to build it. Meanwhile, he would set a few of the storm windows up in a semicircle to block the wind and help reflect some of the heat from the campfire. And we'd eat outside. He built a picnic table, and it was pretty grim. Seems to me that more than the storm windows, he had tarps that he would hang vertically to break the wind. And there was an elderly couple that lived a mile and a half away near Duxbury, who had a basement set up for hunters to sleep in the basement. There were beds down there. Well, we got to know Mr. and Mrs. Valentine. The husband was a DNR warden, and their house was a DNR supplied home. So we'd go sleep in their basement. It was warm. Where am I? I'm lost. Okay, I know where I'm at. I'm on Autumnal Gold. That's the name of this trail now. This is a rather disjointed discussion, I'm sorry. We would fill gallon water jugs from their outdoor spigot, take them back to the 40 acres with us in the mornings. Dad and Manford Christofferson set about continuing to clear the land for a cabin site for light in the evenings. At night we used Coleman lanterns and hurricane lamps. Now that's a term you don't hear much anymore. It was really a cool technology. It worked similar to a Coleman, I think, I don't know how it worked. Look it up, you'll find it. The mile and a half away from the 40 acres was Duxbury. And I told you they had a general store there. We'd go down to the store, and that was a high time for Marilee and me, because at the store there was a bar. All they could serve was 3-2 beer, and you could get your meals, you could do everything there, get anything you wanted. Pound of nails, pound of hamburger. But the high point for Marilee and I was an electronic or electric game called Shoot the Bear. Ooh. And this unit was set up on the wall, 10 feet higher. So, well, I was a little kid, so who knows, maybe it was only 8 feet. And there were a couple of rifles set 20 feet away in a holders of some sort with a big, large electrical cord coming out of the butt. So it was connected to the big unit on the wall. And the electric bear would walk back and forth. Every so often he'd stand up, and he had a big magic eye on his underside. And if you aimed at that and hit it, he would, I don't know what he would do. He would roar even louder being shot. He also had a electric eye on his flank, so when he was walking by back and forth, if you hit that, he would roar some more. Shoot the bear. The couple that owned Duxbury store were Archie and Martha. Very nice people, very friendly, very hospitable. You know, I only knew that place from very early years of my youth, a couple years at the most. All right, Suki, where are you? There she is. She was running by and looked over. Oh, here I am. Well, Archie and Martha got divorced after a couple years because it turned out that Archie was having an affair with some other local woman. And I don't know much more about it than that, but the store changed hands. Archie and Martha disappeared, even though their house was 4 or 5 miles down the road. We'd go by it every time we were going back and forth. And then next door to the big building was an oak, a log structure with gas pumps out front. And I mean, it was a real log building. They'd have to fix the chinks that were constantly falling out. And so the next people that came to run the place were the Dumases, Mrs. Dumas, and Peter Dumas, her alcoholic husband, who was, he was not active in doing anything except drinking. Their home was directly through a doorway, through the kitchen, and the door would be open every so often. You'd look in there and you'd see a lazy boy, easy chair, and a TV on, and a couple of feet propped up on the footrest of the lazy boy, and that was Peter Dumas. And once again, you could get anything you needed, including a home-cooked meal. I'm trying to remember Mrs. Dumas's name. But they owned that place up until 1965, 66. And then the Vinks took over, bought it. And being a kid, I was not involved in it. I didn't know how anything worked, who was what. But the Vinks, Joe and Beverly, Joe was a very active guy, very typical Minnesota silenced person. Didn't have much to say unless it came down to guns or government. He had a lot to say about those subjects. He liked his guns and he didn't like the government. So there you go. He got enough to talk about there for years. Shoot the Bear went away. We never saw it again after they closed the big building and Martha and Archie got divorced. But Bev and Joe ran the store for years. In the mid-60s when we go up there, they had 3-4 children sort of our age, and we would get together with them and hang out. That's when you didn't want to be around your mom and dad at all, so it was all right. Gary was the one who was my age, and he was always talking about, next year by this time I'm going to have me a Honda 50. Oh, I got excited because when somebody says they're going to have something like that or do something, it means they are. I was very naive back then to think when people said they were going to do such and such meant they were. Well, he didn't. Bev and Joe ran the store. Joe was much more active in it than Mr. Dumas was. But Joe was also active in, oh my God, buying acreage, having cattle, doing logging, driving the road grader for the township. Just about anything you can imagine he was good at. He owned a lot of property. Well, and more and more as the years went by. I began going back to the woods myself once I lived in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, and I had my own business. Dad died in '97, and I decided, okay, I'm going to begin going to the woods now, which I did. In fact, I went every other weekend or every third weekend, depending on how much I could get away. I was going to school at the same time, beginning in the year 2000. And the more I went, the more I realized there's a book here. And I began writing a book. I enjoyed driving over. It was a 4-hour drive, and Bev was always just so ingratiating with me. Oh, there's my second son, or like a son to me. She'd hug me, and she always had like 6 or 7 hummingbird feeders hung around outside the windows of the store. She was just a go-getter, always working. And what a life, what a horrible life. They were open 7 days a week from like 7 in the morning, 6 in the morning during hunting season until 9 at night. Oh my God. She would get part-time help, and a local woman would come in and work a day or two a week. Oof, but nonetheless, there was another local gentleman, I'll say gentleman. He was probably 20 years younger than me, and he would like to drink beer. He loved to drink beer and ride his ATV around everywhere. And around there, nobody cared. The nearest law enforcement was 40 miles away in Pine City, the county seat, so we never saw law enforcement. And he liked to drive his pickup truck with a lot of empty beer cans in the back. He was a character. I don't know whatever happened to him. Tell you more about him. I'm sort of disjointed here. I want to keep things a little bit more. About the store, right about the year 2000, I think, I drove over for Duxbury Days, D-A-Z-E. About as much local fun as you can have. They opened the town hall building, and everybody around from the surrounding would bring a potluck dish of some sort, and they had more fun games and things to do. They had a parade at noon, and the parade was made up mostly of little kids in a little wagon being towed by a ATV, and they had buckets of candy, and they were just hurling the candy as hard as they could from the as they rode past on the highway, which it was the highway out front, but there wasn't any traffic on the highway. So the parade was also made up of Miss Flame. She had a little tinfoil crown, and I asked Bev, who is Miss Flame? What is that about? Well, nobody seemed to know. She's just Miss Flame. This girl was about 12 years old, quite heavy. She sat in the back of a pickup truck, facing backward in a folding chair, and waved at her subjects as she went by. There was also I can't think of the word, like the head of the whole day, the ringmaster, but he wasn't. He was an older gentleman who sat in the back of a pickup truck, also on a folding lawn chair with his wife, waving as they went past. I recorded this whole thing on camcorder. I had to get up at 5 in the morning to get over there by 9 because I didn't want to miss a single anything. One of the young women that Bev found to work the store was Peggy, a really energetic, lively young woman, maybe in her early 40s, who wrote a weekly column for the Ascove American. And really all that was about who went to visit whom, who had a pregnant daughter down in cities and who had last visited when. But Peggy was really a go-getter with Bev in Duxbury Days celebration. She loved to talk, and she loved to talk and to talk and to talk. You could walk away from her, go out the door of the store, and she would come to the door and hold it open as she's yelling more information to you about something that she thought you needed to know. Drove a Cadillac, an older model Cadillac, but nonetheless, every time I'd turn onto the county highway, I'd turn and look down toward the store. Yep, there was her Cadillac nudged into the first parking bay. It all sort of came to an end about, God, 5 years ago now. I didn't go over to the cabin much anymore. Bev, we found out, got some sort of a blood infection and was dead within 3 or 4 days. Just bingo. Joe, he hired a logging company to come in and log off vast acreages of his land to pay for back taxes, which it turned out he owed thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in back taxes. And the court apparently came up with a ruling that that's where his money is. Go in and log it off, sell the timber, and pay us our back taxes. We went and walked on the north boundary of our 40 acres, and oh my God, it was just wide open fields practically. It wasn't quite clear cut, but almost. And what had always been deep woods all the time I would be up there. From the time I can remember, 5, 6 years old, along the north boundary of our property was just more heavy woods, all gone. And when we'd walk down to the river and be on a hillside looking west, we could see across the river where he owned hundreds of acres was just wide open, clear. And that was about 6, 8 years ago. A couple of years ago, he died. Gary, the guy that was my age, he still lived not with mom and dad, but sort of with mom and dad. He never had a girlfriend. He hung around with Doug a lot. And there again, last I heard, his brothers and sisters were all fighting and quarreling and squabbling over who was going to get what. You can't sell that property. It was just a freaking nightmare. Typical insanity of greed. Nobody had the words to say, do whatever you need to do. Give me whatever you think is fair. No, that's not how real people work. That's enough for now. Almost forgot where I was out here. Suki's just sitting, listening to the stories. Oh, I should take this down. Yeah, hang on. Okay, so this is Elite I do remember when I was in high school, a friend and I decided to go to the woods. This was back in fall or winter of '69. He had a Studebaker Champion, and we drove the 4 hours. And that's back in the day when we liked to take my mother's Dexedrine, which we did. We got over there, I don't know, 11 o'clock, midnight, something like that. Full moon, and since nobody lived down there, we hadn't counted on the problem of the road is inaccessible because it's got a plow ridge from the county road plow. So we had to walk. It's about a half a mile. I don't remember much more about that. There was another time, just a year later. Yeah, it must have been a year later. Another friend and I drove over. I had gotten my grandmother's '57 Chevy. Once I graduated high school, she gave it to me. We drove over in my Chevy, and there again, I don't remember much about it other than we drove into Sandstone one night. Sandstone was the closest town of about 1,800. And I remember driving through the residential streets going fast because there ain't no cops around here. We can do whatever we want. Jesus. Ain't life just full of stupidities we commit and we survived them. All right, I'm gonna go work on, let's go down there, see what we're gonna do. Suki's all for it. Yeah. Oh boy, oh boy. Hey, which way are we going? I've got photos. I'm so glad I took a photo of this before I did anything to it, having no idea at the time where I was going to go with it. And that's the clearing I did yesterday. And I want to continue from here. Meet up with the Bog's Edge Trail. Open this all up just like in here. Ultimately, I don't know, I have to think about this. If I want to do this first or if I want to go down here, my whole emphasis has been to open the view up. Well, first thing I got to do is haul this out of here. If I don't do that right away, and that. If I don't do that right away, it's the kind of thing that's just going to get shunted aside and shunted aside. That's a real tangled mess, but I realized yesterday the saplings are thin enough in diameter I can use the hedge clipper on it. A lot of it. That will be quick. I want to get this cleared back far enough, sort of on an even sight line with that big birch tree back there. So ultimately, clear back about 5-6 feet, open that whole thing up. So from the house, I have an open view. And another one I was glad to see and think about is this oak. That's a good stout, that's red oak. See the leaves? And it will straighten up now that I've got the shade away from it. It was leaning to find light. All right, what do I do first? Well, I got to do first is haul that crap out of there. You know what I realized yesterday as I was doing this? All I'm really doing is opening it up, back up to how it was when we first began working out here 3 years ago. Because this is where our first, well, not our first, this was one of our break room campfire locations. You can see the burn on that. And there's an animal head. I don't remember what I called him, but I would look at it from the other side. I can't get back there really now. I don't know if his face, this is his beak, something like that. So, all of this has grown up. It was never there before. So I'm just returning it to its natural state. All right, I'm gonna quit talking. I don't know if you can see that touch of red through there. Very definitely an early harbinger of fall. Something, isn't it, how they creep in?